Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Hunter, and I'm the head of programming here at the Appel Salon at the Toronto Public Library. Clearly, there's some regulars in the crowd tonight. As many of you know, the Salon is a venue for new books and big ideas, a public forum committed to the ideals of diversity and democratic discussion. Since 2009, we have brought international and Canadian luminaries to the stage, sharing the voices of newsmakers and change agents, and I hope giving you, our audience, a meaningful personal interaction with some of the very interesting people behind the headlines. Tonight we present From Within, a discussion on the realities of radicalization in the West. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with Hazlitt Magazine. Our guest speakers are Gwynne Dyer and Farzana Hassan. Our host is Global News anchor Angie Seth. Angie began her broadcasting career as a reporter for Omni Television upon graduating from the University of Toronto. She produced 2 entertainment programs, Ishtal TV and Bollywood Boulevard. She took a break from her television broadcast to join CBC Radio as a freelance news anchor and joined Global's Toronto News Hour in 2013 as a reporter. She is now a news anchor. Angie writes her own column for Des News magazine and covers big events in the South Asian community. Her interviews include former Governor General Adrienne Clarkson, renowned actor Kabir Bedi, and renowned film and music video director Jazz Burke. Angie is a strong advocate for women's rights, children's rights, and the fight against domestic violence. She's currently working on a 2-year project with the South Asian Women's Center titled There is No Honor in Violence Against Women and Girls. She's won several awards, including the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012 for her work as a journalist and contributions to the community. And now to introduce our guests, please help me welcome Global TV's Angie Seth.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think today's discussion is certainly going to leave you with more to discuss. So we have about 45 minutes, I understand, for us to be up here on the stage. So let's get started with introducing our guests. Gwynne Dyer has worked as a freelance journalist, columnist, broadcaster, filmmaker, and lecturer on international affairs for more than 20 years. He was originally trained as a historian, born in Newfoundland in 1943. He earned degrees from Canadian, American, and British universities, finishing with a PhD in military and Middle Eastern studies, history from the University of London. He went on to serve in 3 navies and to hold academic appointments at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, at Oxford University. Now, since 1973, he has written a bi-weekly column on current events that is published in just over 175 newspapers. So he's quite well read. Worldwide and translated more into a dozen languages. He is the author of the award-winning book War from 1986, which was updated and reissued in 2004. Also author of Ignorant Armies and Future Tense. And his new book, the one that we are talking about today, Don't Panic, a timely wake-up call that questions the West's approach to the Islamic State. Gwynne Dyer lives in London, England, but he does join us here in Toronto, Canada. Farzana Hassan, also known as Farzana Hassan Shahid, is a well-known writer and commentator on Islam and Muslim issues. Now, though based in Canada, her opinions, particularly on women's rights in Islam and Islamic terrorism, are sought worldwide. For her efforts in promoting interfaith harmony, the National Christian-Muslim Liaison Community of Canada gave her their annual Service Award in 2004. As well as a prominent member of the South Asian Canadian community. She's headed a number of Canadian organizations, including the Muslim Canadian Congress. She's also led the group Family of Heart. Farzana is also a public speaker. She's well known in the media, having been interviewed not only by myself while I was at Omni several times, but by a number of prominent news organizations here in Canada as well as around the world. She's presented papers at several national and international conferences. She writes a weekly column for the Toronto Sun and has authored 3 books on Islam. One of her publications entitled Prophecy and the Fundamentalist Quest, a comparative study of Christian and Muslim apocalyptic religion. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Gwynne Dyer and Farzana Hassan. So I think this audience is pretty eager to get started on this particular subject. So I am going to start with actually looking at the book. And I do want to remind everyone, we are going to be speaking for about 45 minutes. There will be about 15 minutes afterwards for some questions. So make sure as the discussion is going, if you do end up having a question, you think of that question carefully so we can get as many questions as we can in that 15-minute period of time. And then, of course, Gwynne and Farzana will be available afterwards. Gwynne's book will be available afterwards as well. So I think I read it. Farzana has read it. I know Gwynne's read it. And you will find it is quite a fascinating read. So I want to start with that. After reading this book, I almost felt that it was just the chapter one of so many things that are yet to happen. So why write this book now?
I needed the money.
Don't we all?
No, it seemed like, I mean, of course, events keep moving on. It's already starting to go a little bit out of date at the end,
Yeah.
inevitably, and we knew that when we started out. But it seemed to me that we actually are at the end of a phase that began 12 years ago in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And we are now reaping that particular whirlwind, definitely, in the shape of ISIS and Nusra and so on, the various organizations that actually were created by the American invasion of Iraq and self-radicalized and have now taken over much of Iraq and Syria, mm-hmm. which were both dictatorships, horrendous dictatorships in some way, but also relatively modern countries where women's rights were better respected, certainly, than they are now. And it feels to me, I think this is why the Russian intervention happened, by the way, mm-hmm. that we are very near to some sort of conclusion of the present phase. I mean, the Assad government was clearly on the point of collapse when the Russians went in. Had it collapsed, you probably would have seen ISIS and Islamic State and Nusra, which is basically a clone of ISIS,
right.
Running Syria,
mm-hmm.
as well as half of Iraq, and that would certainly have changed, but it may not happen.
Well, I think, the entire situation is extremely fluid, as you say, and I think we're already seeing things are changing as they go on. You've got a different perspective after reading this book, and in our discussions over the years, I think you and I have known each other for over 10 years now. In our discussions, and we'll actually get to this because we have a very interesting point to talk about with regards to just post 9/11. And I think Farzana and I, it was a turning point for us, both being South Asians in this country. But we'll get to that in a minute. But coming to the book, your thoughts.
Well, my main gripe with this whole understanding of radicalization is that it's not some long drawn-out process. To me, the orthodoxy, the Muslim orthodoxy, is not in a benign or benevolent or pacifist mental state whereby you have this long drawn-out process and you start embracing these radical ideologies. In my opinion, the doctrine of armed jihad is actually widely embraced within the orthodoxy. And I'm not saying that every single Muslim in this country is orthodox. In fact, there are many, many Muslims who are, challenging these doctrines. And, many of them are undergoing a lot of introspection. There's a great deal of soul searching going on. But the point is that there is a significant number of Muslims who are very orthodox, and amongst the orthodoxy, the doctrine of armed jihad is widely embraced. Now, when you have a concept which is so widely embraced, in a population, then you also have that risk of just about anyone, just acting upon that belief and executing that plan. So to me, it's not a long drawn-out process. I think we have to rethink our understanding of radicalization and what it means.
Coming to that, and this was a discussion that we were starting to have in terms of, I sort of want to bring this up, and this is something that you kind of point out in the book, and I don't know whether it's something that people are aware of here. I certainly don't see it enough among our leaders, let alone in Canada, but in the United States or in Britain. But when you do read Gwynne's book, you will notice that what he does is he in a very smart way describes to you that there are groups, and I'm talking 1, 2, 3, 4 groups. These groups don't necessarily talk to each other, but they all have one thing in mind, a jihad in mind, their version of the jihad. And I think maybe you guys can clarify in sort of what jihad is, because we know that when we hear the word jihad, everyone goes, oh my God, we need to panic, we're all going to war. It has a very different meaning if we look at the initial meaning of what jihad is. However, we've got a number of different groups where the right hand is, the right hand's not talking to the left hand. However, our leaders, our big leaders, as we refer to our global leaders, see it as if we defeat the Taliban, we'll be fine. If we defeat Al-Qaeda, we'll be fine. And now if we defeat ISIS, we'll be fine. So my question is why shouldn't we panic if they're not all one and the same?
Well, I said don't panic.
So why not?
Well, first of all, I mean, I agree with what Farzana says, but one of the principal problems of the world is the endless supply of 18-year-old males.
Yeah.
And
all
every
around
year,
the world.
And they're looking for an identity, they're looking for a role, they want to play a part that's important in the world, and they'll get on almost any bus that comes by.
And
or some
which
of
we
them
are
will.
seeing quite clearly here in Canada among Muslim youth.
Unfortunately, and that's my whole point, that it is a doctrine that's widely embraced. Now, I'm not saying that there is one understanding of even the doctrine of jihad. Among moderate Muslims, people understand it as defensive warfare. You only undertake jihad, if you're fighting a war in self-defense. Mm-hmm. But there is that orthodoxy, and they believe in armed struggle. And it's a struggle against the infidel, and it's also a struggle against the hypocrites, and the the apostates and the hypocrites, and someone like me also falls into that category because I'm someone who speaks out against orthodoxy, and I challenge these doctrines. Even someone like me would be targeted by these people. Mm-hmm. So,
which we clearly see, and you point out in your book in terms of what's happening with the masses.
Oh yeah, I mean the version of Islam, which is actually relatively modern in its current version, in the Middle East in particular, but it extends into parts of the community here as well, is extremely intolerant of deviant belief within Islam. I mean, they're known as Takfiris. I mean, the Takfiris believe that hypocrites, that is to say Muslims who do not worship in the correct way, should be and can be killed. Now, and this actually, even this has some long history in Islam. I mean, it's never been a general doctrine of all Muslims, but it's got considerable history in Islam in the past. And so, you do have that raw material in the religion, as you do in most religions, if you look hard enough. I mean, Christianity's had its moments as well.
A couple of moments in history.
Where if you are looking for a radical doctrine that will empower you and give you a sense of importance, here it is. And it does involve violence, and which is particularly self-sacrificial violence in a very splashy way. It's very attractive to 18-year-old males, I'm afraid.
Rambo-like.
I was one. And
So what are you trying to tell us, Gwynne?
nothing you don't already know. But I think that there is a particular problem, which is not so much a problem of Islam as a religion, because all religions have comparable problems, but the position of Islam and of Muslim countries politically in the world, which is a radicalizing factor, mm-hmm. in addition to 18-year-olds looking for something to believe in that will give them the opportunity to do anything from look big to chop heads. And that is that genuinely, the Muslim countries of the world are collectively in dreadful trouble. I mean, there are 7 civil wars going on in Muslim countries at the moment.
And the focus is for these groups to be able to control those regions, those areas. So where does the West now come into play? Because we see ourselves as always, threatened. We see ourselves in threat. And in Canada, we have Bill C-51 that's supposed to protect us, as he giggles. We have the legislation against barbaric cultural practices, which you can now call in and report if someone is wearing a scarf the wrong way on their head, and that could be considered to be barbaric, or perhaps the jacket that I have on is the wrong color.
I was going to mention that.
So where does the West come into this play? If the focus is of these groups is the regions. So where does the West come into this play? Because I mean, we see ourselves as, you know, in a romantic novel, we're the you know, the ones that needs to be, you know, the ones that need to be saved.
Yeah, the protagonist. Look,
yeah.
It's not always about you.
Well,
you know?
I'm hoping it's not.
No, I mean that it's because that is what we think. We think it's
is.
about us, and it's not about us. It's very interesting when you go to the United States in particular. And you say, do you understand what 9/11 was about? And they say, well, yes, they hate our values and they want us to kneel before them. No, that's not what they wanted. They wanted you to invade a Muslim country.
Exactly.
And, you know, because,
We
you know,
did.
they weren't making too much progress in attracting recruits to their particularly extreme version of Islam, and their goal was revolution in the Muslim world, starting with the Arab world. Most of them were Arabs. And so how can we get the United States to invade and radicalize people and drive them into our arms? And the answer is, let's go and kill 3,000 Americans. That should do the trick. But the Americans, of course, thought it was about them. And when you go to the United States, it's quite strange. They cannot imagine being the instrument in somebody else's strategy. You know, they've got to be the center of the action.
Well, that's why the aliens keep coming down and invading and taking
Even
away
they
their
know
people.
to land in the United States. They never land in Bhutan.
Well, that's Area 51. So coming now to 9/11, and, you know, as we mentioned, it did change things because, you know, as Gwynne has pointed out, oh my God, they're coming after us. We're the target. Now they're coming after us. So now I point this now over to you, Farzana, how this then changed the dynamic and the direction of where the Muslim community was going in countries other than Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Nepal, you know, all of those areas. How has it now changed that as a result, if we fast forward to what we were talking about, you know, earlier, those 18-year-olds who are looking for something where they can feel belonged. They can belong to something. So talk to me about that, because I mean, this has been a 10-year conversation she and I have been having.
Well, first of all, I think 9/11 was about Americans. You know, America was attacked on American soil. So I disagree fundamentally with you on this. And you know, Canada has been threatened, the Western world has been threatened, but it's broader than that. To me, this is a civilizational struggle. And this is a struggle which, in this day and age, affects every single human being on this planet. So in my opinion, every single human being needs to resist this in some way. Because, again, you know, it's again a question of rethinking your understanding of radicalization. To me, radicalization is not just, you know, jihadi terror. To me, it is violence, institutionalized violence through state machinery, which is also stoning to death for adultery. It is also going after gays and lesbians. It is also going after non-Muslim minorities in Muslim countries. It's going after women. It's about raping non-Muslim women, which is something that ISIS has been doing all along. Not just ISIS, the Taliban as well, you know, when they went into Afghanistan. So to me, this is a civilizational struggle, and I think everyone needs to be aware of this. Because what we have seen now is a great number of onslaughts. You know, our institutions are being compromised here. There are attacks on freedom of speech, you know. We all have to sort of self-censor, you know, ourselves every time, you know, for example, we're in a public forum like this also. When I was coming here last night, I was afraid, you know, I wasn't sure who was going to be in the audience, really. I mean, you know, it's that kind of thing that I think that our lifestyle is being challenged. So,
and as a side note, and you can add more to this,
Sure.
when Farzana says that she was concerned about coming here. She's rightfully concerned. She's had fatwas and situations where she's had to...
Not just myself. I have an illustrious friend here in the audience, Munir Pervez. He's the current president of the Muslim Canadian Congress. He's had a threat against him. I mean, we've all had these...
So this is the new reality. How do we get away from that and come back to, 2010 when Muslims weren't looked at in the way that they're looked at now, where we're not talking about barbaric cultural practices and relating it to Islam?
Well, I would start by not defining it as a civilizational struggle, because I don't think it's anything of the sort. There are clashes of values, as there are undoubtedly between any two members of this audience, but the great majority of Muslims are not radicalized in the way that you're talking about. They're horrified by it. It constrains their lives. It threatens them. So which civilization is against which? I mean, when you talk about civilizations, you're talking about very large numbers of people who share some values that are collectively very different from those that the other lot share. I don't really see that that is happening. I mean, quite interestingly, only 1/4 of the world's Muslims are Arabs.
Yeah.
90% of the radicalization and the terror is in the Arab world. Now, why might that be? Well, it might be because Muslim countries elsewhere are doing reasonably well economically. Some of them even manage to be democratic most of the time, Indonesia, Turkey, Bangladesh, so on, Pakistan off and on. And that's where the bulk of the Muslim community is. Now, there are radicals among those communities, just as there are radicals in our community, but I don't see this as a civilizational struggle against, whatever it is, 1.75 billion Muslims. It's not really a struggle against the Arab world either, but it is definitely the center of the infection, and there are good reasons for that. The Arab world got conquered very late in the imperial game. They almost all fell under, imperial rule in the last 100 years. It's still a very open wound in those countries. And when they got their independence, they were manipulated by the West in very many ways. They've been totally unsuccessful economically. I would say almost all the most unsuccessful Muslim countries are Arab. And so there's huge resentment, huge grievance, huge despair in the Arab world, and that is the breeding ground for radicalization. The miracle is there's not more radical Arabs. But it's not, civilizational struggle expands this to Muslims v. Christians, or Muslims v. Buddhists, or Muslims v. Hindus, depending where the Muslims live. I don't really think it's like that.
Well, it's the kind of society you want to build. And the society is built on various values, and each time there is an intersection of Islam with the West, you see some sort of a clash or a conflict. And Orthodox Islam, I should specify. There are all kinds of Muslims, as Gwynne, and I agree with you. I mean, we come in all different shapes and sizes. Absolutely, I know that. But the problem is with the orthodoxy. It's Orthodox fundamentalist Islam, which is driving the discourse, in fact. The other Muslims are just quiet, they're silent, It's the orthodoxy that's driving the discourse. They're the ones who are, formulating the agenda. So that's where the problem is. And what do you do about that? They're the ones who are trying to build these civilizations and societies.
Under their own rules.
Well, I actually think that must mostly be a Muslim problem, because I can't imagine how anybody else could intervene directly and change it.
So why
it's got to be that silent majority of Muslims who deal with that. I mean, in the meantime, we outside Islam, our job is, to contain this if it threatens us, but mostly it doesn't.
So
it threatens other Muslims.
Why then does the West think it must play a role? Iraq and Saddam Hussein is a classic example of the U.S. going into that country to free the Iraqis.
Oh, was that what it was for?
Well, apparently.
I was wondering that.
I don't think that plan worked out so well.
Well, no,
definitely.
I mean, we had about a reason a month for several. It rolled over very rapidly. Why we
spent millions of dollars trying to find those weapons of mass destruction.
No, I mean I don't think that at the at the bottom end of the society where ordinary people live, never mind the leadership. Even now, I don't think people in the West are convinced that they are at war with Islam. I mean, because they've got neighbors who are Muslims, and they're not at war. You know, I mean, it's all done at the high political level, and at the high political level, there's much hysteria, and a good deal of profit-taking from the hysteria.
Of course, no, I agree with you there.
But you don't actually have a situation where average Muslims hate or attack average non-Muslims. Not in Canada, not in the United States, not in Europe, not in India even, although it's a bit rough in India from time to time. And even in a place like Lebanon, which is 15-year civil war. I was there last month, and and ISIS is just over the anti-Lebanon hills, but it's still a place where people get along. There is no great civil, and anyway, Muslim and Christian values on most axes are identical. I mean, they're both Judeo-Christian, Islamic. It's the same heritage.
Philosophically very different. Very different.
I was going to ask that question.
Philosophically different, but in terms of rules of behavior.
But it reflects on the society. It reflects on the laws. It's definitely one of the.
So how do you, as a Muslim woman in Canada, how do you define Islam for you?
For me specifically, well, I'm a very spiritual person. I pray and I believe. I'm a believer. I haven't renounced Islam or anything. But I don't believe in, inflicting or imposing my ideas on the next person or the next Muslim, which is something, unfortunately, Orthodoxy does want to do. Anyone who sort of deviates from the accepted narrative has to be a target. I'm definitely a target. So it's a huge problem for us. And you talked about this in your book that, well, ISIS's immediate target is the Muslim and the Muslims from within and the Muslims who are seen as the hypocrites. Yeah. Well,
That's you.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
But again, I would say that may be their immediate goal, but their ultimate goal is the global caliphate. You cannot ignore that.
So if you're saying
the ultimate is the infidel, it's not me.
I know, but I run the numbers, and I don't think this is going to happen.
Well, I think that
hence don't panic.
Ideology, in my opinion, the ideology that inspires these movements all across the Islamic world, and there may be small groups, and they're isolated. Okay, ISIS, Boko Haram, the Nusra, whoever. But my point is that the ideology that inspires them is much larger. That ideology is here in Canada, which is why we need to be aware.
So having now said that, and that of course now spills out, we're coming back to our 18-year-old male who is looking to belong and seeks this particular type of Islam as what is going to give him more meaning, or her more meaning. We've seen that. What do we do about that? And now can we define that as that is the threat in the West? That is the threat in this country.
Gwynne?
I would say that you accept that a little bit of terrorism is the cost of doing business in the 21st century. I mean, you do what you can. You certainly try to break up big plots, which are easier to break up because a number of people are involved, and therefore there's communications back and forth, and that you can spot. A single crazy is virtually impossible to spot unless his own family or friends shop him. I mean, how else are you going to find this guy? And so they spin out and they do terrible things. And we lost 2 civilian Canadians plus the 2 terrorists in the 2 incidents of last year. And I would propose, though it is unpopular, that this is a cost that you can live with. If the alternative is attacking your own civil liberties and transforming the political context in which this country operates.
Is it a good enough reason for the West to justify, like the US tried to do when they invaded Iraq, to go into these countries and stop, quote, the radicalization they
There
say is
were
happening.
no radicals in Iraq in 2003.
But that is how they will define it. That is how they will refer to it. And I
know,
come
but
back to Bill C-51. I come back to the legislation of barbaric cultural practices. That is the premise behind all of this. And I'm saying that here in Canada, but we know it exists not only in Britain, it exists in France, it exists in the United States. And it comes back as a justification that says, if these people exist in our country and are doing it based on the beliefs of Islam, how they have defined it, then we need to stop that, and we need to stop it from the source, which is in those countries.
Well, good luck. We tried a few times. It hasn't worked out that well.
It hasn't, but we're still pushing for it.
So I would suggest that a sane person's reply would be, stop then.
Well, now that's a whole different discussion when we're talking about sanity and leadership.
I think it's a very important discussion. I mean, stop already. Afghanistan and Iraq again, and a little bit of bombing Syria and Libya. How do you feel about this as a way of proceeding? Do you think you're making progress here? I mean,
well, I'm not certainly head of the government, so I think if I were, I might be doing things a little differently. But how do we bring things back?
I agree with Gwynne on this. I mean, Bush going into Iraq was a huge blunder. Yeah. I mean, I think we're still suffering because of it. No doubt about that. I agree with that. But what I don't agree with is that there weren't any radicals before that. Ayatollah Khomeini was there before that. Ziaul Haq of Pakistan was there before that. All of these people, they're very, very radical in their approach to Islam. So radicalization, unfortunately, has been there. It's there in the masses. You may disagree. But
no, I don't disagree at all. Of course it was there. I mean, the Grand Mosque in Mecca was attacked in 1979.
Unfortunately, it's been there since day one. The sectarianism, these sensibilities that are extremely sectarian. It's not because of what Bush did, well, partly, but it's also because inherently this is how the Islamic world has been since day one. So we cannot just fault the West for it. So we have to, as Muslims, we have to do the soul searching as well, which some of us are doing.
Yeah.
But many of us don't want to speak out because we're scared, or we just don't want to be in the radar. Unfortunately, there is that trend as well.
Well, it's dangerous.
It's very dangerous. Yeah. It's extremely dangerous for us.
So how do we bring things back? And I'll give you the example, and now as we sort of bring things more recently, Zanita Ishaq, the woman who wore the hijab and the niqab and wanting to do so during citizenship ceremony. In the end, she did get her citizenship. It was in a private ceremony, not in a public ceremony, which is what she wanted. Agreed to showing her face to security officials, et cetera, et cetera. But how do we move now away from that to where we were before? How do we re-educate our society to say that there are a number of religions in this society and they all are valuable and they all represent culture and tradition, et cetera, and they're not all about killing people? Or at least Islam is not about that jihad we've been talking about.
Well, in my opinion, this intolerance is not stemming from, non-Muslims. I mean, I'm saying that unequivocally. I think that it's the Muslims and the orthodoxy that need to be educated in this matter. And first of all, I think that, this whole ideology of jihad, this doctrine of armed jihad, is something that we need to repudiate as a Muslim community, which is not something we've done so far. What we need now is not competing narratives on jihad. We don't need competing interpretations of jihad. We have plenty of those. Jihad is an inner struggle, it's an armed struggle, it's defensive warfare. We have all of those. We don't need those interpretations. What we do need is a clear-cut repudiation of armed jihad. We have to prove now to the orthodoxy that the doctrine of jihad is no longer applicable. It's obsolete. And until and unless we do that, we're not going to be able to achieve anything. We're not going to be able to overcome this radicalization problem in our midst.
Gwynne, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think she's right, but I also don't think it's going to work very fast.
That's true. It's not.
But I mean, you do bear in mind that, Christianity rather resembled this 300 years ago. They were murdering each other in very large numbers over rather small points of doctrine, and armed struggle was very much part of the process.
I don't see parallels, though.
Well, actually,
I
if you
understand
look
where
at,
he's coming
if you,
from, though.
if you look at the way Sunni and Shia are now squaring off in Iraq and in Syria and in other countries too, though less visibly, it does have some echoes of, let's say, the 1600s in Europe.
In some ways.
You could get religious wars raging across the Muslim world, lining Sunni up against Shia. It's happening in Pakistan now. If you're Shia and you go into a mosque, you're likely to get bombed.
What happened in India between Sikhs and Muslims?
So, this is going to have to work itself out over a long time. And I'm sure that eventually, I'm not sure, but I'm reasonably confident that over the long term, Muslims will reinterpret what jihad means. They'll probably never get rid of the word because you probably can't.
We don't need reinterpretation. We need a repudiation.
Well, good luck. I mean, yes, that would be great, but I really don't think most Muslims are ready to repudiate a fundamental tenet of the religion. So reinterpretation is probably the best you can hope for. And Christians have done that to a significant extent with quite a few doctrines.
Well, that's why I'm saying that every single human being needs to resist this.
Yes, I agree.
That's why we need public discourse on these issues.
And we're having it, and
We're having the
so we
discussion
should.
right now. How do you see yourself as a Muslim here in Canada?
Well, I'm very comfortable in Canada. I've never been discriminated against. I write for the Toronto Sun. I say whatever I want to say. I don't have any issues here. As I said, I have my own personal religiosity, which I don't like to impose on other people. And I wish other Muslims would do that too, and I wouldn't have an issue with that. Mm-hmm. My problem is with Islam in the public space. And, that's something that, myself and some of my friends here have been opposing, and I think rightly so.
Yeah.
Where do you think, we've just had an election. We are now going to be bringing in a new government, new ideas, new perspectives on things. What direction do you think Canada should be going in with this issue, both of you, whoever wants to take a stab at this one?
Well, personally, I wanted the niqab banned. I wrote several articles about it because first of all, I think that the niqab is an affront to ordinary Canadians, really. This is just creating a barrier. When you enter into public spaces, you enter into a social contract with other people. And this is just very, very arrogant on the part of these women who are just, going on suggesting that, well, this is my right, and okay, do whatever you want in your personal space. I don't have any issues with that. But if you come here, this is also my space. This is not just your space. So, I'm totally opposed to it. And I, as I said earlier, laws, we have to have secular laws. We have to have a separation of religion and state. That's something that many of us are, sort of arguing in the public space.
France has these laws, and it doesn't seem to have stopped radicalization there. I would rather not see these laws. I deplore the niqab, and it's not even Islamic, for God's sake. They were wearing the niqab in Hammurabi's time, in sort of 3,000 years ago. It was a class issue. Upper class women are veiled.
Of course.
And Greek and Roman women of the upper classes were veiled, and that was what it was about. And then the Arabs, who previously, as far as I know, did not veil, conquered the Byzantine Empire and took over quite a few of its customs, including the veil.
Well, it's political in Islam in action, as far as I'm concerned.
It has become political now, and it is in your face. I'm here, and you're going to have to put up with it, and so. And that can be offensive, but frankly, I think that you lose more than you gain by giving them the luxury of being victimized.
Oh, I don't think so. I totally agree with that.
The question that we asked, and the reason I'm bringing up the niqab again, because I think it's sort of part of that whole belief on how Islam is defined, and you're a very clear example of a practicing Muslim who does not wear a hijab or a niqab or a burqa or what have you, is, in speaking to some of these women, they defined it as their culture and their religion, and which did puzzle me, because there's nowhere where I had read that part of that required you to do these things. I mean, if you go back, I mean, if you read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, was there any religion that required them to be covered from head to toe and be reproductive individuals? Nowhere where I could have read, but apparently it was. And I think, you know, that's sort of the same idea behind it. So why, when you say that it should have never have been an issue, which I completely agree, and I think a lot of people in the room will agree, why did we make it an issue? Why did we even put this woman on camera and
She made it an issue.
Yeah.
She made it the issue.
Oh, yes.
It wasn't the liberal Muslims. It wasn't the non-Muslims. She's the one who insisted on doing this. So, I mean, I've always asserted this, that it's the Islamists and the fundamentalists who are actually turning all these things into a huge issue in the public arena.
Oh, she wanted to fight. There's no question about it.
So how
yeah.
does that then make things more difficult for you? Because once again, we seem to categorize everything in one category. And it's clearly not that way. And I think that is one of our biggest faults here.
Well, it makes it very difficult for me because I don't want to see this obscurantist understanding of Islam proliferate in society, and I see that happening all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, there is this preacher, female preacher called Farhat Hashmi, mm-hmm. and she runs schools here, mm-hmm. and you know, she trains these women over a course of a year, and they get this diploma, and then they go out into the community and they preach the same views. And so it's proliferating. You wouldn't even know how rapidly it's happening. 10 years ago, you wouldn't see niqabs. Now you know, see so many on the streets. So that's my problem. I don't want to see, that's why I'm saying this is a civilizational struggle. And that is why I think that every single human being needs to resist it.
Well, it comes back to the whole debate that we had with regards to Sharia law coming in here in Ontario.
Yes.
Yeah.
In
So,
2004.
so, you know, what are our views on what Amish women wear? You know, I mean,
Yeah, but
we never.
I'm sorry,
what are
there's
our
a
views
difference.
on men wearing kippas? You know, I mean,
Okay.
it's
No, and that's why I bring up the question,
Yeah.
to each his own and how you would like to do it, as long as you don't instill that belief and say you must all wear blue because that is how we're going to define ourselves in this country, bottom line. Absolutely not.
But
Can I-
Islam
Sorry, go ahead.
Islamism has global designs. This is
No,
not the
fair enough.
This is a
Yes, it
small
does.
community in,
Yes, it
in an
does.
Amish village, you know.
Yeah, I know.
Unfortunately.
Okay, I give you that point. I have
But
global designs
but it gave them a
myself. I'm
reality
just-
show, though.
Sorry?
I have
Yeah.
global designs myself, but I doubt it I'll achieve them, and I doubt Islam will either. I mean, look, one of the things I've noticed, I live in quite a Muslim area of London, and there are lots of women in niqabs, full fig, not burqas, but the next thing to it, in the supermarket with me. And what I notice is their children trailing around behind them looking deeply embarrassed. I mean, you know, these little boys and girls are growing up English, and their mom is dressed in a black sheet. And you know, some of them will follow because your parents' influence is very powerful. But what most of those families are going to go through is a typical immigrant tragedy, which is you came to this country to be yourself, but your children turn out not to be copies of you because they are so influenced by the country they're growing up in.
But that may be true, Gwynne, but the point is that you know, this sort of view is being very aggressively marketed.
Yeah.
You know, there's a great deal of indoctrination going on. You know, these kids
yeah,
are just constantly indoctrinated on a daily basis.
I agree.
And they're going to produce the next generation.
Well, not necessarily, not in the West, and probably not in the Arab world
but
either.
it's happening. It's
No,
happening.
some
Look
of
at the
them,
stats.
some of them are going, but I mean, no, it's look.
Well, it's very polarized. I'm not saying that.
I understand.
You know.
Yeah, this has got to be done by the Muslim community. We can't do it.
And I
for
think
the
that's
Muslim
exactly what the two of you have agreed on. Yet,
Yeah.
we seem to poke our noses into it.
Definitely. I mean,
You guys agree on that point.
I want more Muslims coming out and, you know, denouncing, you know, jihadi violence, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
I want
But-
more Muslims to come out and be honest about honor killings. I don't see
Yeah.
that happening.
It
So
should.
yes, absolutely.
And on honor
But-
killings, the state has the right and the duty to intervene, but on questions of how you dress, I don't think it does.
Yes.
It's
honor killing
symbolic.
is
It's
domestic
what it
violence in any
represents.
community.
Yeah.
That is what an honor, it is domestic violence. It is murder, it is death.
No,
Yeah.
but it's also what the niqab and the burqa represent. The burqa and niqab, no matter what the niqabis say, is a symbol of oppression. It is. It's not glamorous. It's not beautiful. It's not liberating. It's none of that. It's what the burqa represents. That's
Agreed.
what I have issues with.
Look, I think you're talking values, and I agree with you on the values. I'm talking tactics, what makes sense to do. And I do not think it makes sense to start legislating for how people dress because they think their religion decrees that. I mean, if I...
But there is a certain decorum, Gwen, when you're in a public space, there is, look, none of us are naked here, you know? I mean,
okay, so
this is another extreme, right?
What would
you're fully covered.
What would
you're
your
fully
preference
covered.
be? What would your preference then be here in Canada? What would your preference be? Do you agree with, for example, what they want to do in, you know, well, what they've done in France, where you can't have any, and I'm, you know, throwing it out there.
In the public
no,
spaces.
no religious symbols, et cetera. So in this case, no crosses, no, you know.
Look, we're not legislating religion in your home, okay? This is about public spaces. You know, the organization to which I belong, the Muslim Canadian Congress, we have argued this, you know, endlessly, that, you know, this is about banning the niqab in public spaces. You know, this is where everybody comes together. Canadians of all stripes and persuasions come together, you know. And so there is this social contract. You have to respect the other person's opinions as well. And we don't see these arrogant niqabi women doing that. I have serious issues with that.
Can I point out that one of the unintended consequences of such legislation, one of the unintended but inevitable consequences of legislating against the niqab in public space is that some women wearing niqabs now, not necessarily by their own choice, will be not allowed to enter public spaces and will be confined to the home.
Oh, that may happen in a few cases, but you know, again, it's a question of again, it's a choice. I mean, why do you want to inflict that upon yourself? Why do you want to self-marginalize?
To have it happen in anywhere, I think, is wrong for anyone to be confined in any which way if they're going to be wearing, however they're going to be dressed. But I want to end it with this. Here in Canada, where and what direction should we be going in? We have a new government that's coming in now. What direction should we be going in Canada?
Okay, my turn? I think Trudeau is quite right to want to stop bombing in the Middle East. Not because I always, in every imaginable case, oppose bombing, though in most cases I do, but because this is doing no good. Absolutely no good whatever. There's not even a strategy that could tell you how it might do good. So stop. Get rid of Bill C-51. You know, we did not legislate new laws about how people may take baths because several people drowned in the baths last year. And I don't think, you know, it's just...
Not a perfect analogy.
It works for me.
They got it.
And the Muslim community deserves all the support we can give it, but it does not need us to pass legislation so it can win its battles. It has to win them itself against radicalization. Because almost anything we do, tactically speaking, will in fact drive people further into the lager, into the fort, and they will feel beleaguered. And in those circumstances, the most radical voices get the larger audience. So don't push them back into some confined space where they cannot express themselves because they are under attack. They cannot express dissent openly because they're under attack from outside. That's what I would do.
Farzana.
Well, I was with the Conservative government on this. I completely disagree with Trudeau. And, you know, I read your book and you said that, well, this creates resentment in the Islamic world. It does. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But I think that, you know, again, Muslims in Muslim countries have, in my opinion, a very warped understanding of Western foreign policy. You know, many of them don't, and many of them immigrate to Canada, by the way. They don't understand the difference between Western aggression or Western intervention. They just don't understand the difference. They think that, you know, they see planes flying over their territory, they see boots, American boots on the ground or Canadian boots on the ground, and, you know, they start feeling resentful towards the West. Whereas they don't understand that there are so many times that the West has helped the Muslim world. So I don't think that the resentment, I don't think the resentment is justified in many ways.
Okay.
So, you know, what is the option? Not do anything? I think that, again, I will come back to my point. This is a civilizational struggle. And I think that we cannot be apathetic because we cannot allow these obscurantist views to proliferate in society.
All right. Well, it's an incredible book. I'm not going to give away the ending. But I'll tell you, you'll be blown away. Ladies and gentlemen, Farzana Hassan, Gwynne Dyer, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you both. Here comes the other fun part of the evening, if you have questions. All right, sir, we'll have you go first.
Very good. Mr. Dyer, I'd like to take you on only gently on your last point that we do not have a strategy in the Middle East against ISIS. I disagree with you, but I won't make that point. What I'd like to ask is what you believe should be the strategy.
I think that if you are not prepared to put boots on the ground, and neither we nor the Arab countries who at least openly oppose ISIS are prepared to do that, then we are just going to have to contain them as much as we can, and that would involve Turkey closing its borders, which would help, and and frankly, saving that dreadful government in Damascus from collapse, which is what the Russians are actually doing at the moment. Wait to see how events unfold. One of the things that might well happen is a renewal of the war between al-Nusra and ISIS. They are basically peas out of the same pod, which was fought in 2014 and involved about 5,000 fatalities. I mean, they are so doctrinally determined that they are willing to fight over split hairs. And they may well self-destruct. It would be a nice idea, and since I have no ideas for how we can destroy them, I am prepared to wait and see if they do it to themselves, if they are adequately confined, which would involve maintaining the control of the Syrian state over the territory it still has, maintaining control over the non-Sunni parts of Iraq, which is basically all that's left outside of ISIS's grasp, and closing the Turkish border. Then you sort of insist the problem and you await developments. If somebody had an army that was willing to go in there and do something about it, I would wave a flag for them, but I see nobody with the willingness to do that.
All right. Next question.
My turn? Okay. I wanted to mention that Amish women don't bomb markets and mosques and churches. And it is women and people with face coverings who do that. And I would say that if it dresses like ISIS, we should at least be a little bit suspicious. That's just a statement I want to make. I don't need an answer to that. But the question that I have for you, the question that I have for both of you, all three of you, is I was reading that President al-Sisi went to the leading Islamic, Islamic school in Egypt, which is one of the world's foremost Islamic schools. And he said to the clerics, why don't we put on a nicer face of Islam to the world? You have to re-examine your values and not be so pushing of jihad and this and that.
So, sir, what is your question then?
My question is, none of you have talked about the clerics who interpret these things and what role they have in changing attitudes. That is how I see It's a lot of the clerics.
So you want to know what the where the clerics play, what role that they play?
Yes,
Okay.
and
Farzana.
in Canada
Well, the
as well, not only around the world.
Okay,
you know.
Farzana.
Well, the clerics are not going to change viewpoints. They're not going to influence Muslims to adopt a more benign understanding of Islam. They're part of the problem. These are the people who constitute the orthodoxy. So it's basically Muslims, who have a different understanding of Islam, one that is not accepted by them. They are the ones who have to come forward. Again, I'm saying this over and over again. They are the ones who need to come out, because we have to create that critical mass, that volume, that number. That's going to be meaningful, and that's going to bring about that meaningful change. We don't see that happening, unfortunately.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, as someone who has received death threats in Canada right here, I want to tell all Canadians first, and then I'll ask my question, that we are simply being hoodwinked by a lot of oversimplification of what jihad is all about. And that's the narrative that has taken place all around. My question to the Mr. Dyer is, and this is a question where Farzana comes in and talks about civilizational problem, and then you say that's not a civilizational problem. So I ask you, being a Canadian journalist, how many mosques in Canada are being controlled by those who are professing the doctrine of jihad? One. Second, how many mosques have you been to yourself, not overheard, where you have heard English speeches, not Arabic speeches, which are consistently praising jihad in Canada? That is one. Second, and the last question is, altogether, is that the fundamentalist jihadist philosophy of Sayyid Qutb, which is very available in Canada and universities in Canada, how much do you use this in your analysis when you oversimplify and say there's no civilizational problem in Canada or in the West and radicalization?
Civilization and the jihad issue here.
A significant proportion, probably nearing half of the mosques that I know in Canada and in London, where I live, are under the control of imams who I think you would regard as the orthodoxy in an extreme version. The problem has been greatly exacerbated by Saudi money, which has sort of pushed the Wahhabi ideology, which is not itself the ideology of ISIS, but damn close.
And then you're saying we shouldn't panic.
Yeah, I'm saying you shouldn't panic. Okay. I can think of lots of problems I worry about more than that. I mean, here is a community that's gone off the rails. Is it my community? I'm sorry, no, it's not. Are some of my fellow countrymen members of that community? Yes, they are. Should they take care of it? Yes, they should. But this is not the end of the world. It is actually a process. I'm sure the Muslim community in Canada one generation from now will be very different from what it is today. That's inevitable. And in the meantime, I don't wish to take responsibility for reforming Islam. I'm not a Muslim. It shouldn't be my job. It shouldn't be the state's job. I think there was more, but it's back to the civilizational
But
issue.
Islam is influencing your life in Canada. So I think that, every one of us needs to think about it and needs to find a way to calibrate all this.
Well, it ain't influencing my life as much as majority values are influencing the lives of the young generation of Muslims growing up in Canada, I'll tell you that.
Okay, well, let's go to the next question.
My question specifically is to Ms. Hassan. I'm curious about this business of death threats. Where have you received a death threat?
In 2007, members of the Muslim Canadian Congress, the founder of the Muslim Canadian Congress, Tariq Fatah, the current president of the Muslim Canadian Congress, Munir Pervez, who was the person who just asked the question, and myself, we received a death threat on the answering machine of the Muslim Canadian Congress that you people are hypocrites, and if you don't stop doing what you're doing, I will come and slaughter you.
Well, I need to tell you something. My name is Nazneen Sheikh. I'm a Canadian author. I've been in Canada for 48 years. My background is Sunni Muslim. I do not practice my faith, but I have respect for it. I have written flaming op-eds in the Globe and Mail, anti the niqab, shaking Nicolas Sarkozy's hand. I have recently released a book, which
I'm
would be
aware of
called
that.
Anti-Muslim. I have never, I do not read The Sun, so please forgive me, I'm not familiar with with the work that you do. I do not recognize this Muslim Congress that you keep touting about. In 48 years, there has been no reason to have a Muslim Congress. I think that this is
What is your
scare
question then?
tactics. Well,
It's
I'm
not a scare
annoyed.
track. This
The
death
question
threat-
is, why is a person like Farzana Hassan on this panel?
Well, then
I
maybe-
object to that.
The point is-
strenuously.
I think-
Why is she
I
on
think
that
then
panel?
that is a question
Are
that
you
perhaps
saying
you
that
would need to
I'm
discuss
going in
with
for
the
falsehood by
organizers.
claiming that
Absolutely. And that's
Absolutely
all.
not. This was publicized in the Toronto Star in 2007 in the March 7th edition of the Toronto Star. Please go and look it up.
Okay, so obviously not in agreement with Farzana being here. Well, nonetheless, this is why we continue this discussion. The next question, please.
To Mr. Dwyer, you said that 9/11 was a provocation. Could you be more explicit? Who was it that wanted to provoke us? Osama bin Laden and/or elements of Saudi Arabia, or the Saudi Arabian government, or who?
There were elements of Saudi Arabian elite who were certainly giving Osama bin Laden money. But no, I think you have to bear in mind, Osama bin Laden's formative experience was fighting the Russians in Afghanistan. And in the end, the Russians were driven out and the population had been so radicalized that it was possible for the Taliban to take over. Now, he's an Arab. What he really dreamed of being, if his dreams had all come true, was the first president of the Islamic Republic of Arabia. How do you make that happen? And the answer is not by going and preaching in the streets. They'll chop your head off. And you can't get access to the mass media. How do you radicalize people in the Arab world? And the answer is get the Yanks to invade.
Okay, so you're saying bin Laden and Zawahiri.
9/11 was entirely about getting the United States to respond with massive military force and serve his purposes.
Bin Laden and Zawahiri.
Yeah,
Okay.
bin Laden. And there were some people supporting him, but I don't think he even told Mullah Omar what his plans were, frankly.
Next question.
Lovely. Thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences with us. I have a question for you, Ms. Hassan, but values aside, specifically about the law. So it seems as though with your perspective, you're setting up a bit of a good Muslim versus bad Muslim dichotomy, which in Canada is simultaneously obviously divisive, but a bit unconstitutional. So I'm wondering how and why you think your discomfort with the niqab, which as a value statement is fine, but how it outweighs a Canadian citizen's charter rights to Section 2, freedom of religion, Section 15, equality rights, but generally speaking, as a woman who might wear the niqab, but is also an equal Canadian citizen as you, her rights to be a woman and a human. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I don't think that religious rights are absolute to begin with. As I said, this is a social contract that we enter into when we enter into public spaces. Now, as far as the choice of these so-called choices of these women, I don't believe that those choices are genuine because there's a lot of fear-mongering, there's a lot of hellfire and brimstone preaching going on. If you're only fed one particular narrative on the niqab, that this is how you attain piety, it's not really a choice to me. So as far as I'm concerned, again, it's a question of entering into the public space. We have a certain decorum that we have to maintain. Religious rights are not absolute. And the other thing is that the burqa has become a security threat. It most definitely has become a security threat. And the government has the right to legislate anything that is detrimental against anything that's detrimental to society. And that's how I see it.
Next question.
I may be a bit idealistic, but I don't see this as a religious dichotomy. If we remove religion from the scenery, people would be fighting anyhow. We would have 18-year-olds fighting for other causes. We had this over millennium, and we see this in soccer matches everywhere.
Sir,
My
what is
question
your question?
is, do you see a peaceful solution with involvement of Europe and United States and Canada pouring money and in a good manner, not with boots on the ground, and teaching the good values of Christianity and the Islamic world, which was very tolerant before the Inquisition.
Okay, so you guys we're pretty much running short of time, so we'll have to do those last three questions quickly, but if you can answer quickly on this.
I'm not sure I can answer quickly, but I don't think that, again, I don't think that we are going to bring them the solutions. They're going to have a great deal of difficulty in arriving at solutions on their own, but I can't imagine where else solutions could come from but from within the Arab world. I mean, who else is going to tell them what to do? I mean, the world has been trying for quite some time now with significant lack of results. And they probably will go through some very unpleasant experiences on the way to solving their problems. I have very little doubt that in 100 years they will have.
Okay,
I won't see it.
I'm going to move on to the next question so we can get these last
This
three in.
question is for Ms. Hassan. So I'm a little fascinated with your study of orthodoxy. The way you talk about it, it makes it sound like there's very much a paranoia and apocalypse happening out there. But yet at the same time, you draw a parallel where orthodoxy is a very small segment, and then you have the majority of Muslims that aren't subscribing to that. So where do you exactly see the solution? Because you have not provided a solution at all. And I want to say, and how is this orthodoxy? And I would like you to draw a comparison, because there are orthodoxies everywhere that draw to radicalization. Okay. How is this any different from Jewish orthodoxy and those who support it, which currently is supporting systematic oppression of Arabs and Palestinians? Okay, and how is that any better, or how is this any worse? So please, deconstruct orthodoxy for me, because I see no rationale in that.
That'll take forever. I mean, if I start deconstructing orthodoxy, what I was talking about was jihad, and that it's a mainstream concept. It's not something that's confined to a smaller segment of the Muslim community. It's a concept that's widely embraced, and it's embraced by the orthodoxy. That's what I was talking about. And we don't have a clear-cut repudiation of that. So you wanted a short, so.
We're running short on time. Maybe it's something that the two of you can discuss afterwards. Sir.
I wanted to ask Gwynne Dyer, and thank God there was an historian on the program. Impoverished and desperate 18-year-olds is apparently a large part of your explanation, and I would accept that.
Not necessarily impoverished, desperate,
no,
yes.
Desperate and humiliated, but on the other hand, you didn't say much about the West, and you didn't say much about fundamentalism in America, and you didn't say much about the alleged story that Bush and Blair, in spite of his recent recantation, prayed before they ordered the invasion of Iraq. And would you like to say a bit more about our fundamentalisms as well as the other sides?
There was a wonderful incident on British television where an interviewer, rather attack dog interviewer called Paxman, asked Tony Blair, did you pray with President Bush? And Blair answered another question. He asked him 6 times, and Blair never answered the question directly. So obviously he did.
He answered like a true politician then.
Yeah, I think there was obviously fundamentalist versions of Christianity running. Blair, although he was formally the Church of England, joined the Catholic Church as soon as he left the prime ministership, and I suspect he joined Opus Dei as well.
All right, last question.
Hi, Mr. Dyer, I saw you a few years ago, 2005, 2006. You spoke at Trent University and focused on the invasion of the Middle East and its connection to oil and the control of that oil through the region. I feel like this is something we haven't touched on tonight, is the connection to oil and its control. Since you gave that speech back in 2005, the price has dropped. There is extremism, instability. Do you feel that maybe they're kind of the orthodox area of the Muslim religion is whipping up kind of a frenzy to kind of combat the instability, combat the invasion? Is it, is that kind of
as I recall, what I said in 2005 or 6, because I did write a book about it at the time, I could check, but I'm pretty sure I said the oil is not what it's about. Because it wasn't. I mean, why on earth do you need to control the oil? They have to sell it. You're the only market. You know, it doesn't matter who's running these places. I mean, you know, Saudi Arabia would starve to death if it didn't sell oil. There's, you know, 27 million people in a country that can grow food for 4 million. So, you know, it doesn't matter to us who runs Saudi Arabia. Presumably matters to Arabians, but not to us. So it can't have been about that. It certainly wasn't about the oil price, because in fact, when the Americans conquered Iraq, did the oil price go down? You know, I don't recall it doing that. I think it's a completely separate issue. It's been used as a justification for very many things that have been done in the Middle East, but it hasn't really mattered since about the end of the Cold War. Until then, it mattered a bit because the Cold War was a zero-sum game, and if you controlled this country, you controlled that country's oil. But once the Cold War was over and they're all operating in a free market and they're not anybody's allies, or at least not their sole allies, it doesn't matter who runs these places, which has been one of the points I hadn't made tonight. But I do care because I have friends there. But I do recognize that from the point of view of North America, it doesn't matter who runs those countries.
All right. That was our last question. Ladies and gentlemen, Farzana, Hassan, and Gwynne Dyer, thank you all very, very much.